Let's get a little bit into a couple of the questions. So the first question I had here is, should I wait to buy and hopefully rates will come down? So I just touched on that a little bit. So it's kind of interesting. I have two different conversations with buyers and sellers right now. For buyers, to me, I think it's always a good time to buy, because I bought back in 2016. And when I purchased, every real estate friend that I have said, dude, you're an idiot. The market's going to crash. That was 2016, just to remind you. And obviously it didn't crash. And we've continued to see prices go up. And now my home is worth almost double of what I paid for it. So in my opinion, I think anytime is a good time to buy. But let me tell you why I think today is a good time to buy, because as inventory is still somewhat abundant, and interest rates are not quite where you want them yet, but there's less competition out there, right? So give you an example, $550,000 home 9 months ago, if you would have put that house on the market, you would have had 25 showings over a weekend, 10 offers, all waiving contingencies, and probably 70% of those would be cash, or a lot of them, because there's investors coming in, right? So you were competing heavily and you were paying way over market value at that point. And that's what was driving up prices, because buyers would say, well, you know what? I need this house because I just sold my other home and I have nowhere to go. And I got a ton of equity out of this house anyway. So who cares? They want 550. I'll pay 625. And so they were paying 625,000 for a house that realistically was probably only worth 550. Again, drove up those comps. So right now you have plenty of opportunities to negotiate. You're getting sellers that are willing to pay percentages towards buy downs on interest rates. They're willing to pay closing cost. They're willing to negotiate on pricing and drop pricing. You don't have to worry about the lease backs anymore, because there is more available inventory, that the seller has a better chance of finding that home that they were looking for. That was one of our big challenges that everybody's forgetting about from last year, was that we had a lot of challenges also just getting people out of the homes, because the sellers would say, well, shit, man, I'd love to sell my house, but I don't know where I'm going because there's no inventory. So now it's slowed a little bit. To me, it is a perfect opportunity because you don't have to worry about the lease backs and that type of stuff. And there's so many different loan programs out there. I can't even name them all, but you've got these 2-in-1s and different buy down programs and ARMs that can get your interest rate down in the short term. I shouldn't say guessing, but I guess guessing that it's going to come down, right? Or looking for that most likely the interest rates will come down at some point, and then you can refinance that property and get the interest rate down lower. So that's why I think it's a really good time to buy. So if you're on the fence and you're thinking, well, I better wait, I wouldn't wait, because as I talked about earlier, as that interest rate comes down and the inventory continues to deplete, more buyers will come back in the market. Less inventory means prices will go back up. So hopefully answer that question for you. Kind of a secondary question, differences and advantages to new construction versus resale. So a couple things to think about here. I always tell people it's like buying a new car versus a used car, right? So when people try to compare pricing on a new home that's been newly constructed, or even one that's been renovated, to other existing homes in a resale market or resale neighborhood, right? There's really no comparison, because you've spent a ton of money, and especially in this market with the cost of materials, to be able to upgrade that house or build that new home and have it like new, if it was renovated. So there's going to be the advantage of having everything new. That's going to be your big advantage in the difference. And you don't have to worry about the renovation of it if you're buying in a resale neighborhood. If you're buying new or you're building, especially in the luxury market, so many luxury buyers, we drive around for a long time, and they're trying to find that perfect home, because quite honestly, if you're going to spend $3 to $5 million, right? You want it to be the perfect home. You want it to have everything that you want, the number of garages, a large primary bedroom, the large kitchen, all that type of stuff. And sometimes that can be difficult to find because these are custom homes, they're unique. And so you may just not find exactly what you're looking for. And so by building new construction, you're going to be able to design and build exactly what you want. If you want those extra rooms, if you want an art room, if you want a 10-car garage, whatever it is, you're going to be able to build all those features into that home. And that's one of the great advantages of building a custom home. Doesn't mean that you don't have problems. People forget that. They buy what I call a used home or a resale home, and they end up having some issues with the house. That's common, even on a new construction, right? Because this house is brand new. Things are just getting finished. Not everything's been used in it. And as you start to use that home, of course, you're going to have things that are going to go wrong with that house. Now, typically the difference is going to be is that you're going to have a lot more warranties in place that may cover some of those things, including a builder warranty, to where they will come in and make those repairs at no charge, and take care of those things. So that's the advantage of building or buying brand new, is that you've got those warranties and stuff in place, and you've got a brand new, fresh home, right? Like when I bought my house, I wanted a brand new home. I didn't want a house that anybody else had lived in. That's my preference. And so the big difference there, like I said, is that you've got warranties versus no warranties. Even with the home warranties that do come on a resale property, they don't usually match what you're going to get through a builder. They don't usually cover a lot of the things that you would want covered if something majorly goes wrong. And you can't always catch everything through an inspection. That's the bottom line, because sometimes you can't foresee what's going to go wrong with certain things. So the big difference, like I said, new construction versus resale would be just one, you're getting exactly what you want if you're building it on a custom home, or close to it, even on a track home, because you can get the finishes and all that type of stuff that you really like. And then on the advantage on a resale, though, is that one, you typically have a more mature neighborhood. Okay. So you've got a neighborhood with greener trees and more landscaping, and a more established neighborhood versus, and you're not dealing with the construction that goes on around you. And I can tell you personally, my wife will tell you too, for the first year that we moved into our house, it was miserable because all the houses around us were being built. You could never take an afternoon nap. There's always trash all over the place, even as clean as they tried to keep it, but you couldn't control the wind. And so you had all of this trash all over the place. And so that is one of the disadvantages of living in a newer community or new construction, is that you've got to deal with the construction in the meantime that's going on. And even though we were in the fourth phase, the very last phase, we were still dealing with a lot of that construction. So hopefully that answered your question. One other thing I will touch on new construction versus resale. Typically on new construction, you're going to pay a higher price per square foot, right? So a little bit longer before you get some equity into that house. But typically, especially if you're in the third or in the first or second phase, you're going to gain equity as those other phases sell out, because those prices will increase as they get towards the end. And so it's really good to buy in the early time of that community. Whereas with resale, you're going to usually be able to get for a little bit less price per square foot. So if you feel that you can budget it and save some money by doing it yourself, then you can put that money back into renovating the property. So that's one thing. So also want to talk to you about owner will carries. We've started to get a lot of questions about that in this market. As interest rates skyrocket, or as they went up, something that kind of came back, and this was big in the 80s when interest rates were really high, is that sellers would say, hey, look, why don't I do an owner will carry? I own the house outright, or I only own a small amount on it. And so owner will carry is always a great option. I've done a few of them myself. To my surprise, they were a lot more beneficial for the seller and buyer than I thought. For the seller, it gave them an opportunity to sell the house at a premium price because that buyer was willing to pay a little bit more and didn't have to get an appraisal. And they were basically paying a premium for that owner carrying that property. Also, the way and I'll just give you an example of one of my sellers that did an owner will carry. For them, they looked at what the interest rate was that they were going to make back on their money, the money that they were getting paid as a mortgage payment from the buyer, versus what they were making for interest on their money. And they were like, wow, Darin, this is a much better deal for us by carrying the property, because we'll make good interest on our money as the buyer buys in. Now, a lot of people confuse like a lease option or rent to own with a owner will carry. And they're always worried about somebody destroying the home, right? Well, the big difference is that, number one, typically on an owner will carry, you're not doing any less than 20 to 30% down, right? So if it's a $1 million home that you're doing an owner will carry on, you're talking about a $300,000 down payment from that buyer that they do not get back, because essentially you become the bank, right? And so they're not getting that $300,000 back. So they've got a lot of skin in the game, number one, no different than if they were going to a traditional mortgage company. So the chances that that person is going to default and damage that home is about the same as what they would do as if they were buying it from a bank, in my opinion. I haven't seen it in all cases that I've seen so far with the owner will carries. It's worked out great. Typically, the owner will carries are being done short term. You're not seeing a 30-year owner will carry. The longest I've done so far is 18 months. And the reason that buyer needed it was for various reasons. They were selling a couple properties. One of them they knew would take a long time. They had the assets there, and they just didn't have the ability to get a loan yet. Strong credit, everything, but it just didn't make sense for a bank to give them a loan. So they did the owner will carry with my clients. Fortunately, 6 months later, they sold all their properties. They were able to do a refinance and take out that owner will carry, paid my clients off. My clients made great interest on their money in the meantime, were able to sell their home at a premium price and walk away from the home. So in my opinion, I think in certain scenarios, if the seller is in the right position, the sellers always ask me also, well, do I handle the collection of payment and blah, blah, blah? No, that's all done through the title company. The title company helps set all of that up as you're going through the escrow process and closing. Usually they're going to turn that over to a servicing company, which the buyer will pay those fees. The servicing company will collect that money. And also you can put things in place that, if the buyer doesn't make their payment on time within 30 days or something like that, they default. And yes, you do go to a foreclosure process at that point. But I've found some sellers that actually thought that was an advantage because they said, hey, if the client's giving me $300,000 down and a year later they default, I get that house back, I can turn around and resell it. And so in certain situations, owner will carry can be a really big advantage. In this market for sellers, if they don't own anything on that home and they don't have any need to go somewhere right away, or let's say they're looking to downsize a little bit because maybe their kids have moved out, they don't need this big house anymore, and they don't need the cash from it. An owner will carry could be a good situation because they could actually now become competitive with the banks. Maybe they could offer a competitive or lower interest rate with the same amount of money down. And so for them, it may make sense at that point. And then same thing, the buyer can refinance in 12 to 18 months when those interest rates come down and get out of that owner will carry. So a lot of people have a kind of a bad taste in their mouth or what they think an owner will carry is. In my opinion, I've seen it happen several times where it's a great situation for the seller and for the buyer. So definitely something that I would consider. The biggest question, does it cost anything to have a realtor represent you? I'm going to be really honest with you about this. When I hear realtors say this, I think it's like the biggest bullshit line in the world. It does cost something. Now, you may not be paying me out of your pocket today as I drive you around, right? But buyers are not stupid. They know the seller is paying that commission and the seller is factoring that commission into the seller of their property, right? If the seller is paying, only has a $30,000 profit on that home and the commission's $30,000, most likely they're probably not going to sell it, or they're going to have to sell it for a higher price. Whereas if they didn't have an agent representing them, and this may be, most agents are probably gasping right now because they're probably thinking, why the hell would you speak against agents? But the reality is that, let's just be honest, it does cost. It does cost the buyer because it's being factored into the price, and it does cost the seller because the seller is going to factor that into the price as well and pay that out. But it's a fee. It's a service fee to have a professional involved, like you would have in anything. Whether you hire an attorney, you can go out and hire an attorney to help you sell your home and do the paperwork. It's still going to cost you money one way or the other. So the nice thing about an agent is that it's not costing you any money up front. Whereas with an attorney, I promise you, they're going to charge you up front to help you draft the paperwork and do all that process. And the agents are experienced. Well, most of the agents are experienced. And so if you're working with an experienced agent, the advantage is that most likely, one, they're probably going to be able to negotiate a higher price for you. They're going to know the advantages and the disadvantages of that property versus another property that somebody may be coming in with. And quite honestly, you've got a guided tour by someone who's going to be taking you around and showing you homes and giving you all the insight, especially if you're not familiar with an area, at no charge, right? So this person could drive you around for 3, 6 months, 9 months, and they're not charging you anything for that unless you buy something from them. So there is a big advantage of using the realtor. And again, like I said, I always go back to this because I always see realtors post this stuff that why would you not use a realtor? It doesn't cost you anything. Yes, it does cost you something. It just doesn't cost you something up front. And so that's what I like to keep in mind is that, the agent is working for you until you decide to purchase something. And so obviously that agent is going to be very motivated to do a very good job for you and perform and get something done because there's no reward unless they can successfully close for you. Versus where if you were paying them a retainer up front, say you're paying them $5,000 to drive you around for 3 months, for them, it doesn't really matter if you buy or not because they make money anyway, right? And so just something to think about and something to consider when deciding if you're going to use a realtor to not to help you buy or to help you sell. So wanted to touch on that. And then just talking a little bit of one thing I wanted to point out, property taxes. So that is something that has changed here in Clark County. A few years ago, they went from if you are a full-time resident, you only have to pay, you get to stick with the same percentage that you've been paying, which is most likely a little less than 1%. If you are not a full-time resident, it jumps up to 8%. Now, if you're a full-time resident, if you've submitted the paperwork, it should not have jumped. But all of a sudden, about a year and a half ago, I noticed that my mortgage payment went up, contacted the mortgage company, and they said, oh, your property was not assessed the right way. And so we had to increase the amount in escrow. That started seeming weird to me. Flash forward about 60 days ago, I pull out my tax statement, I look, and the county has been charging me 8%. So make sure you are keeping an eye on this, especially if your taxes are factored into your mortgage and your mortgage company is paying those for you. And all of a sudden you've seen an increase in your mortgage payment and they're telling you that that is because the home was not assessed properly. Go back and look at that because there's a good chance that you could be paying that higher rate now because from when I spoke with the person at the county, they are so backlogged that they have not been able to get caught up on some of it. And so that 8% automatically went into place and started charging people because they may have not processed the paperwork that you submitted. So hopefully that answers your question on the property taxes. And that is one of the advantages of Nevada. You even look at some of the other states. I've got a client of mine that was looking to purchase in Florida because of some of the same reasons, no state income tax, but they were completely shocked when they saw what the property taxes were. Same goes for Texas. I have a client that purchased in Texas and they were absolutely shocked. And they're like, shit, Nevada's still the better place to buy. Not only because it has no state income tax, but our property taxes here are really low comparatively to most other places like California. And like I said, even Texas or Florida, where we have a lot of people moving from California and other places as well. So big advantages in Las Vegas and Nevada, especially for property taxes. So keep that in mind. So guys, hopefully I was able to cover a lot for you today and give you some good insight on where I see the market going over the next couple of years and especially in the short term over the next 6 months. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. You can text me on my cell at 702-485-7755. I'd love to answer any questions for you, or you can DM me through Instagram or Facebook. And again, I'd be happy to answer those questions for you. So thanks again for joining me today, guys. This was episode 11. 11. All right. So look forward. We'll have some great guests coming up in the next couple of weeks and have some more inspiring stories for you. Take care.